Welcome to Behind the Bet, powered by WagerWire. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I'm joined by Calvin Smith. For those of you who have watched us here in the past, you know who Calvin is, and we'll get into that here in a second. But I want to remind everybody once again, we're powered by WagerWire. Download the WagerWire app over at your favorite app store, whether it's the Google Play or the Apple App Store. All one word on WagerWire. Track your bets, bet value calculator. Make sure that when you're offered a cash out that you're not being taken advantage of. All of that great stuff over there at the WagerWire app, and so much more to come. Also, if you are struggling or know somebody who's struggling with a little bit of a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. There's somebody there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Don't suffer alone. Now that we got all of our legal things out of the way, Calvin, how are you doing, man?
Doing well, Kevin. Getting ready for Thanksgiving. Got everyone coming over. Excited for a big week of football, both NFL and college. So it's a good time of the year.
Yeah, you mentioned that with it being a big week of football. I don't know if that went over the air, but my phone rang right at that point. But it's a big week with rivalry week. Obviously, Ohio State and Michigan is going to be the thing we're going to talk about the most. But just how crazy has this college football season been in terms of the SEC? Maybe not as powerful as we thought, but then again, you listen to the four-letter network, they're telling you that a 3-loss team is better than a Big Ten 1-loss team, and we can kind of get into all of that. But just the craziness, especially as somebody who watches the games and has a quote-unquote, not to use a pun, a betting interest in them. I mean, what has it been like?
Yeah, it's been interesting for sure. You think about, I live in Knoxville, so I'm in the heart of SEC country, and a lot of my friends are obviously big-time ball fans and have that SEC bias towards them. So for me, having a different perspective this year and who my alliance is to in that conference, I've had to make some compelling arguments to the other side of the spectrum, giving the Big Ten. So it's been a lot of fun, obviously some chirping. But, I think the biggest thing is, like you said, the 12-team playoff and the nature that's presented and the opportunity it's allowed for teams who previously would have never had a shot to make the playoffs or, go fight for a national championship. Now have a one foot in, 1 foot out. So I think it makes for a unique landscape for what, we have coming the next 6 to 8 weeks.
For those who are not familiar with Calvin, who just joined us, we've changed our distribution a little bit. We're now distributing this exclusively on WagerWire channels over on the Twitter feed and on the WagerWire YouTube feed. I urge everybody who's watching us to be sure to subscribe to the YouTube feed, WagerWire YouTube feed, so you can get all of these shows and so much more. But let's get into the reason why we're talking to Calvin and why there is a fan in Knoxville who is pulling for the Buckeyes. And that is because he has a tremendous 3-legger on the line right here. 2 legs have already come home. Scotty Scheffler with a win in a tournament event. The Tennessee Vols winning the College World Series in 24. Both of those already in the can. And then Ohio State to win the national championship, turning 14,800 and change into 437, 417, and 70 cents. Don't forget that. So obviously there is a lot on the line right there, and you put this bet in early, and we're going to take the bet down and come back out. And obviously Ohio State was among the top teams that were being talked about at the point that you made the bet. I don't know if they were the number 1 odds team out there. You do have some ties to the state of Ohio, but just to kind of refresh people's memory, why? I mean, why was this the bet? I mean, obviously right now you're sitting in a great position, but I mean, why at that time, when you sat there and you took, kind of took a flyer?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was having played college football myself and understanding the landscape of veteran leadership and how far that can carry a team in postseason. And I continue to see these OSU guys that were mid-round guys, could have, got a couple million signed for, came back and obviously hadn't beat Michigan in several years. And I thought the volume that would carry this time of the year, it's crunch time, that veteran leadership, having been there, having done that, a lot of them having been in the playoffs, would carry a ton of weight. Then you go see the additions of Caleb Downs and you see Will Howard. And at the time, I've been a big Will Howard fan. Obviously, he had some flaws at Kansas State, but one thing I don't think you could contest is his ability to show up in big games. You look at what he had done at Kansas State in the Big 12 championship. Obviously, he went to Texas and took them to the ropes with a very understaffed roster. And so for me, fifth-year guy coming in to lead the helm, and I saw his competitive edge, and I was just thinking of the landscape of all the changes, all the guys that had been lost to the draft and transfer portal and all these things with a lot of the, blue bloods of the college football landscape. And for me, Ohio State made the most sense. And you and I both know, you're right there. Ryan Day, this is his year. And I don't think anyone would doubt that, given all the guys he got to come back, Will Howard, Caleb Downs, Jeremiah Smith. We can go on, but this is his year. This is his team. This is his roster to get over the hurdle and get the job done that everybody in Columbus and all the fans of Buckeye country across the nation want. So that's kind of, looking back, that was my perspective, placing the bet.
You mentioned Will Howard and having watched Will Howard, and I think he has quickly won over the Ohio State fan base. He only gets 1 year in Columbus based on his eligibility and being a transfer. He has had 6 games, I think, of 80% or better passing, but he's also winning the press conference. And I don't know if necessarily in Knoxville you're getting to see all of that. I mean, over at my other job, we do put the press conferences up over at BuckeyeHuddle.com. But so much of it is about the leadership, as you said, and you get so much of your leadership out of your quarterback. And I'm not here to relitigate the past, but there were a lot of people who felt that maybe one of the shortcomings of Ohio State the previous season was that there wasn't the buy-in with everybody around Kyle McCord. Is that, is that a fair statement?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I watch the post-game conferences and see his how he plays with the edge on his shoulder. And, there's still Ohio State fans that question, can he get the job done on the biggest stage? I mean, there's no doubt that people still have question marks, but having played football and understanding and seeing the way he carries himself, demands the huddle, and how his teammates seem to love him. And he's such a selfless guy. I mean, I saw he, on the Buckeye walk, if that's what it's called, he was wearing the run the damn ball hat and honoring Seth McLaughlin. And so it just seems like everything you see post game is always about his teammates and the ultimate goal of winning a national championship. And it's never look at the numbers I put up, which he's put up phenomenal numbers, but it's always reverting back to his teammates and the number one goal of obviously beat the team up north, but the bigger picture, winning the national championship. And I think the way he's carried himself and won over a lot of the fan base, is accompanied by the way he carries himself post-game, but also on the field. And, we saw the Signetti little celebration he threw there. And I think you got to have that chip on your edge as a quarterback. That you see that coming from your quarterback. Imagine what that defensive room swagger looks like, or the receivers room. So I think they go as he goes, and the way he's carried himself has been tremendous in my perspective.
I'm going to throw this out here. Will Howard's not going to win the Heisman Trophy, but is he getting shorted by not being on some of the lists? I see the top 10s and everything else, and he's not on any of them. And, his numbers are every bit as good as a lot of the other quarterbacks who are on the list a little lower down. You're somebody who watches all of these types of things. Obviously, Travis Hunter, Ashton Genty, Cam Ward, guys like that, and we're starting to get some questions in too. Is Will Howard being kind of slept on for that? And again, he's not going to get an invite to New York, but should he be getting mentioned there?
Yeah. I think that there's definitely fair consideration if you want to look just from a statistical standpoint that he should be in some conversations. In no way do I think from a pure talent perspective he's the best quarterback in the country, but I told a close buddy of mine this week, at this given moment, and I can say this with full confidence, there's not a quarterback in the country I would rather have leading the Buckeyes this time of the year than Will Howard. I understand Shedeur, Cam Ward, you can argue Gabriel, Quinn Ewers, any of those guys you want to throw out are probably more raw talented than Will Howard and his character traits that he possesses from a talent perspective. But his ability to lead and demand the huddle and execute exactly what Chip Kelly and they're asking him to do is as good as anyone can do in the country, in my opinion. So I think there's definitely fair value in saying he deserves some conversation giving statistics. But if we're truly going who's the best college football player, I can kind of undersee where the landscape lays from, the betting odds currently.
Yeah, yeah, and we know that Heisman has really turned into a quarterback award, which it really shouldn't be. I mean, Genty from Boise State would kind of break the mold as a running back. I mean, I like to see running backs get there because they get hosed in the NFL because the position has been devalued. But let's go back 6 weeks, I guess it would have been. Ohio State goes to Eugene, Oregon, loses a tough one. Obviously, Will Howard, the ill-advised slide. Was there a second left? We'll never really be able to relitigate that one either. But where were you in terms of your mindset on your ticket? Because we know that one loss is not necessarily fatal to your playoff chances now in the new 12-team system. But was there any hesitancy toward how you felt about Ohio State there in a difficult 32-31 loss? Or did you view it as, well, Ohio State went on the road to play a top 5 team, came within, a whisker of a bad OPI call against Jeremiah Smith or whatever of winning the game? And I mean, did you ever think of hedging?
I didn't think of hedging. I think it was more that second point you made, that they went on the road at night to Eugene, Oregon, who I've never been to, but I've heard, even though the stadium is smaller than some of these big ones, is hostile as an environment, probably top 5 in the country, and battled their butts off. Obviously, like you said, we're literally a bad OPI or a slide 2 seconds earlier from likely winning the game. So for me, it was just the thought of, I'd watched Oregon, I'd watched the other teams in the country, and I knew Oregon was one of the best teams in the country. And anytime you can go on the road in a hostile environment at night and compete the way they did, I think goes to show, this is one of the best teams in the country. And obviously we've seen that, and I think they're continuously hitting their stride. But no thought of hedging or cashing out. I think probably the bigger worry was the Nebraska game. Obviously, that was kind of one of those sleeper games that we came across. But Oregon perspective, it gave me more confidence that this team can go win the national championship. And I would much rather lose the regular season game in Eugene than when it matters and, when back's against the wall, do or die.
The college football playoff bracket, and I'm kind of jumping all over the place, so, bear with me because I've got 50 questions and I'm trying to stack them in an order that makes sense and probably failing. But you look at how the college football playoff bracket works, the top 4 conference champions. It doesn't have to be the Power 4, but the top 4 conference champions get the top 4 seeds, get the first round bye. In looking at it, that number 5 seed, which is where Ohio State has been mocked the last. Things could change a lot here, moving forward. Ohio State beats Michigan and then goes to the Big Ten championship game. If all of that happens, does the 5 seed have a smoother path than maybe even the 1 seed because of the way it is and them not reseeding after the fact? I mean, reseeding makes a lot of sense. Maybe not for travel because you don't know where the heck you're going to be going. But is there is that a cheat code to be the 5?
I dang near think it is. And again, I've sat down, thought through it, obviously watched the show last night, and at look ahead betting lines, just for perspective, they had Ohio State minus 21 against Arizona State in the opening, and then a neutral side against Boise. And I think last I saw, they were 18.5-point favorites. So realistically, you're 3 score favorites in your first 2 games to get to the quarterfinals to go win the national championship. I don't know how it can be much more appealing than that. Obviously, I understand you get a bye, you get to rest up, but you're getting the 8-9 who, I think it comes back to the SEC where a lot of those SEC teams are kind of teetering in that 8-9 spot. And do you want to see a Tennessee or a Georgia, in that round 2, or do you want to see Boise State? And so I'm interested to see if they ask Ryan Day. Obviously, we're focused on, the team up north and letting that pan out. But post big, that week, if there's any questions or any curiosity out of his thoughts or where their head's at, because they're thinking about that. There's no doubt in my mind that that's not in some way being talked about as they look, post Michigan and down the road.
We'll get back
I'd be
to the
curious
playoff here.
thoughts.
Yeah, my thoughts are I think it is a cheat code, and I think it's something they are going to have to address because nobody's going to lay out. I mean, you don't want to sit there and be like, well, we're going to dog our conference championship game and hopefully get the 5 seed. I mean, that's really trying to thread a needle because you don't know what the committee is going to do. And you could suddenly find yourself 6 or 7, and you've probably drawn a much worse path at that point.
Yeah.
And, while I believe the 5 seed based on what everything looks like today and what I expect it to look like on Sunday, I think that 5 seed is going to go to the Big Ten runner-up just because of the differences in records and even perception right now between the Big Ten and the SEC. You go to the Big Ten championship game and you mess around and you find out you've lost by 18 points. Do you get dropped to 6 or 7 at that point and get the worst path? Now, I don't know who you're necessarily putting there in 5. I mean, what theoretically could happen is, just talk about how crazy things are. The Big 12 could theoretically be left out of the playoff because the top 5 conference champions, at no point does it say, again, that the Power 4 have to be in there and that 5th one has to be the Big 12. Tulane is lurking at 17. If Tulane wins the American, it could come ahead. It could come up ahead and take that spot. So I think that it would be a happy circumstance if you end up at 5, a hell of a consolation prize. And, without even looking at what the finished bracket is going to look like in 2 Sundays from now, I think that you pencil the 5 into the semifinals unless the 5 really just happens to be a critically flawed team. And I would even put like a Clemson in there. I mean, I don't think Clemson ain't Clemson right now. I mean, it's playing a hell of a lot better than it was earlier in the year. Right. I'm not a Cade Klubnik believer by any stretch of the imagination. And, well, gosh darn it, dadgummit, Dabo is Dabo. And, kind of is what it is. So I think that they're going to have to do a course correction, but they're locked in for 2 years, more or less. And then there's the talk of going to 14. I think at that point, you probably have to have something in there to make the bracket work a little bit better. I mean, that is going to change the algebra a little bit with having the 14 teams. It's more teams in, but I think it's an additional round of buys or something like that. But there's still going to be teams that are going to have sweetheart draws, and that's not necessarily something we see in March Madness.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think they're starting to learn too, realistically, is it fair to reward a conference champion a bye that realistically is not a top 4 team in the country? And so my thought is I'm totally good for an automatic qualifier, but to get the bye, I truly think it should be the top 4 teams in the country from a ranking perspective. And I think we see that, a Boise State is getting a bye over an Ohio State, and then that round 2, they're an 18.5-point underdog. And so I hope they make that change moving forward. Obviously, this is a test for everybody. This is the first time we've ever seen it. So I get that. But you just think about that from a perspective and a reward, compensation doesn't necessarily make sense. But obviously, I know there's a lot of things that are going to continue to work out.
I want to get to talk about the Michigan game, but this dovetails into another thought. Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner, came out couple weeks ago and said that the SEC, because obviously that's his interest, and the Big Ten should both get 4 automatic teams into the field. This year, if you look at the numbers right now, the SEC is only getting 3. Yeah. And you could do some mental gymnastics to maybe get them down to 2. So, is Greg Sankey a wizard already campaigning to sit there and try and stop the atrocities against the SEC? Or do you think that that's fair to have 8 spots already locked up more or less by AQs from 2 conferences? Or, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that they're the 2 best conferences in college football. I think from a pure depth perspective, the SEC is probably deeper 1 through 8. But I think top heavy from who are the 2 best teams in the country, in my opinion, there's no doubt it's the Big Ten. So at the end of the day, I think the question is you want 4 automatic bids, but who was your previous fourth scored 3 points and got beat by 20 plus points to a 5-5 team. And so at the end of the day, you got to go win the game that's in front of you. And there's no like handouts in this realm. You got to win each week, and every week's tough to win. Every week's a different environment and a different task at hand. And so there is a ultimate reality. You know, if Texas A&M beats Texas, is Texas deserving to be in? At that point, their best win is Michigan, who we're about to see what the Buckeyes do to them this week and see how good of a team Michigan really is. And so that's a fair question. A 2-loss Texas team with no top 25 wins, are they deserving to get in the playoffs? I don't know. And so I'm interested to see. I think this week's going to shake a lot of things out, and I'm interested to see what that looks like.
Yeah, the last couple of weeks of the rankings show have been relatively boring. There have been upsets. Don't get me wrong. If there weren't, I mean, we would all be doing fabulously well in our sports books and everything else. So there are upsets all the time, but there hasn't been a ton of upheaval at the top since maybe a couple of SEC teams dropped a little bit. But we get into Ohio State and Michigan. And Ohio State is, I haven't looked at the line as of this morning, 23 point favorite. Was it how much? 20.5? It's come down.
It's 20.5 now.
Okay. I got him at 10 at the start of the season, and I'm kicking myself for not putting more on it. But that aside, what are your expectations for the game? You said it right early on. I'm here. I'm in the forest. Sometimes I can't see the trees. I don't see the national perception. I was at Ohio State for 4 hours yesterday doing interviews and everything else. What is your perception of what is upcoming on Saturday, other than bone-chilling cold at Ohio Stadium with a high in the upper 20s and a low in the high teens?
Yeah, I think you look from a perspective of Ryan Day, and I heard the interview he had, and it really kind of took me back when he said, aside from losing his dad, the losses to Michigan have been some of the worst things that's happened to him and his family in his lifetime. And you just see, you take a step back and realize how impactful this rivalry is and how much it means to the landscape of college football, given the two histories of the programs. And so that, accompanied with all the guys that came back that haven't beat Michigan and what's at stake and who they want to do it for. And I continue to see these pressers, and you saw Jack Sawyer's, they're asking, he had a great game, obviously, against Indiana. He cares nothing about the Indiana game. He's got one task at hand, and you see all the chirping videos of what Michigan said last year. And for me, I mean, I expect no mercy to be given. And I think if they can hang 100, they're going to hang 100, and I'm here for it. So I'm going to go ahead. We've not done this before. My best bet of the weekend is Ohio State team total over 31, because I think they're not taking the foot off the gas the entire game.
I'm going to put that in the comments. So people who are watching, team total over 31, best bet. All right. We're going to put that up right now. I may jump in on that as soon as we are done with the show. Historically, the team that runs the ball the best wins this game. Like 99% of the time here in recent memory. I don't have all the numbers in front of me at the point. Michigan can't throw the ball. Davis Warren is not a great passer. That is not me being ugly toward the kid. I mean, he's somebody's son, so I'm not trying to be a jerk or anything like that. He's just not a solid passer. Michigan is a team that can run the ball with Kalel Mullings and Donovan Edwards. Ohio State is much more multidimensional with the passing offense. But let's remember, C.J. Stroud threw for well over, I think it was over 350 in one of the losses, and it didn't necessarily matter because Ohio State couldn't run the ball. The Buckeyes do have a healthy 1-2 punch of Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Does Ohio State have to outrush Michigan just because of what the trends have been? Or, is every game happen in its own vacuum and none of that other stuff really matters?
Yeah, I think you want to obviously win the rushing battle. I think any game you step into, that's the goal. Establish the run, opens up the pass game. But I think the reality is Will Johnson, from everything I've heard, is not playing. And so you have three guys who would all be number one wide receivers on 98% of teams in the country. Who are they going to have to guard those guys? And I always go back to that watching these games. I understand Chip Kelly's willingness and desire to be able to establish the run and what that opens up, from an offensive scheme. But at the end of the day, I've not seen a team that can guard those three guys man to man. And if not, they're going to have to bring guys continuous in the box, and that opens up the run game. And so for me, obviously, I would love to see them continue working on establishing the run. Last week they busted a couple late, but I wouldn't say they established the run from an early perspective. But Will Howard's ability, the play action, the wide receivers we have, I just think I haven't seen a team across the country, and especially that Ohio State has played, that can guard those guys, and one of them's not open. And so I think they do a great job with the balance. I would love to see the run game be more established a little bit. And I think with that interior defensive line that Michigan has, that would be a great, achievement for us to do. Mason Graham's obviously a top 10 pick. But, I don't necessarily think you have to win the rushing battle, but it's all obviously a perk with those guys that you have out wide to truly be able to open up the offense.
Yeah, something that's forgot on the Indiana game. Indiana went into that game number 1 in the nation against the run. And it's not something you necessarily think about the Hoosiers being number 1, allowing, I think it was 77 yards a game on the ground. Michigan's 3. So, there's going to be challenges there. Ohio State got up to 115 yards, but granted, Trevion Henderson late run where he took a slide at the 1, and then Ryan Day, controversially, if you're a Hoosier fan, punched it in again. What were your, not to go back in history, but what were your thoughts on that? As somebody who played ball, I don't think you're somebody who would get your feelings hurt that happened. If you want to sit there and keep the other team from scoring, keep them from scoring.
Yeah. When you step on the field, it's to play 60 minutes. I would have much rather just seen Trevion go into the end zone and that have been it. I get his thought perspective. I saw someone tweet, like, you can guarantee he's not sliding at the 1 this week. And I think that goes back to my best bet is they're going to do everything they can to hang 100. But I think zooming out, I'm good with it. You sign up to play 60 minutes of football, and that's what you're there to do. And they did that. You always do worry, from an injury perspective, you're taking your quarterback over top of the pile with, everybody right there and the injury risk that does run. But you can't play football scared. At the end of the day, that's how you get hurt. And so all that Kurt Signetti, and I'm a fan, I think he's done a phenomenal job, but all the chirping, Ohio State sucks, Google me, all that was like, you can say that at JMU, but you're in big boy football playing a blue blood now. So we're still, the Buckeyes, the Ohio State University, and we'll see you in the playoffs for next year and run it right back. So I was here for it. I think it goes to show that chippiness and that edge that the Buckeyes are carrying them with them this year.
Ohio State is on its 4th version of its offensive line. You mentioned Seth McLaughlin a little bit earlier, run the damn ball hats and everything else. They lost Josh Simmons, their starting left tackle, at the Oregon game. They lose Seth McLaughlin a couple weeks ago. They've had to move Carson Hinsman into the lineup to guard, now to center. You bring in Austin Sareveld to guard. What are your thoughts on the O-line? And, I think that we know that games are won and lost in the trenches. And the Big Ten is an extremely physical league most years. I don't know if it's as physical this year as in other years. It's still very physical. Were there any points of where you were concerned, obviously having a lot of skin in the game, with how Ohio State would be able to respond? You brought up the Nebraska game. Ohio State looked bad in that Nebraska game, and that was one of the versions of the offensive line was Zen Mahalski. That just didn't work out. Zen gets injured. He's been on the injury report wishing a speedy recovery to Zen. But are you happy with where the line is right now? Obviously, I think everybody would rather see Seth and Josh out there in a perfect world, but it's far from perfect.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's the reality is it's next guy up. That's why Ohio State recruits at the level they do and has guys that can backfill that and step in and get a job done. And I saw the PFF grades that actually came out. I get you can kind of take controversial take if you think those scores are true, but Searvold and Hinsman graded out the 2 highest on the entire offensive line. And so I think that goes to show that chip on the shoulder and it's next guy up. Obviously, you hate that for Seth and his leadership and what he had shown stepping in and how much he cared about his teammates, that you could just tell what he had done for the community and all those type of things. But injuries like that to guys that mean something to your team, I think ultimately create a sense of, I'm going to go do it for this guy. And this guy gave his all for us. Let's go give it right back. And next man up, let's step up and get a job done for him. So there's two ways to go about it. You can look back and say, oh, our season's over, we better figure this out. Or you can say, hey, it's next man up. We're going to do it for our guy and bring it home. So I think that's the mentality they took. Obviously, the run by no means was phenomenal last week, but given the injury happened on a Tuesday and you got 2 days to kind of mesh this back and put the pieces together, I think they gave Will Howard adequate time in the pocket to throw the ball. And when you needed to make a big play, you got it done. So I'm excited to see their progression, moving forward. Obviously, they're going to have this week and then the Big Ten Championship, then some weeks to continue molding. So I think the best is yet to come of that group.
Another thing to remember about Indiana led the Big Ten in sacks. Yeah, so that's something else, and had the leading sacker with Kamara. Yeah. So, yeah, I think all things there were, went pretty positive. I'm going to get to a question from our audience, Will Heflin. Hey, guys, we've seen this offense wear teams down and take over, but fast starts can be massively important as we head into the conference championship week and playoffs. Think Chip has some things up his sleeve, and I will say that Ohio State in its first series in the last 5 games has scored 0 points. It was turnover on downs, turnover, punt. So, a very slow starting team. What are your thoughts on what Ohio State has in store against, say what you will about Michigan. They do play defense.
For sure. Yeah, I think Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles are both very understanding of the talent and the roster that they have. And so early on, I think it's much more, let's fill these teams out, see what type of blitzes or pass pros they have and they're coming with. And from there, obviously, they adapt and adjust moving forward. But I think a lot of it's just, let's get in the flow, let's get the game going. I think, like Will mentioned, come when it gets important, you get to the conference champ week in the playoffs, those slow starts can happen because a lot of these teams that get up do have defenses and can play. So for me, I think to this point, Ohio State has just been such a superior from a talent perspective that it's really been like, let's fill these teams out. Let's see what they're doing, what we like early on, and then let's make adjustments. And I saw a statistic, Ohio State in the third quarter, coming out of the half in the third quarter, has blown teams out. Like, I think it's like 140-14. I don't know the exact numbers, but it was something drastic. By far the best in the country. And I think that goes to show once those adjustments are made and once they figured out what they like from a schematic standpoint, it's like, all right, now let's put the foot on the pedal and let's get going.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the number because it is outrageous. It is 135-9.
Yeah,
135-9 in the third quarter. Ohio State is in the second is 143-43. So plus 100 in the second, but plus 126 in the third. So you may, and I guess just for full disclosure, Ohio State only 73-33 in the first. And as I've said, teams really take the air out of the ball against Ohio State. They don't want Ohio State to have a lot of possessions. Natural assumption is Michigan's going to try and do that. I mean, Michigan does not have a point a minute type of offense by any stretch. So if Michigan has its way, it wants a lot of 9, 10, 11, 12 play drives taking 6, 7, 8 minutes. Now, will that offense be able to sustain that? If you're an Ohio State fan, the answer is, well, hope not, but that's the plan, I would assume.
For sure. And I think we saw a team that Michigan reminds me a lot of, Iowa. And I honestly would probably take Iowa's offense over Michigan's any day of the week. But when Ohio – and I told a buddy this – but when Ohio State commits to stopping the run, it's best of luck. And I think the guys up front, obviously, they've been able to do it pretty much the entire year. I know Nebraska had a couple runs. Again, we talked about that game. Oregon was able to do that a little bit, but the weapons Oregon had kind of created an empty box. But with Ohio State loading the box, Caleb Downs, that D-line, the way Cody Simon and Sonny Styles are playing, I would take Michigan under 80 rushing yards this weekend, and I would say that rather confidently. I know maybe late game, if Ohio State's up by 40, maybe they get over the hump, but I just think it's going to be we're going to load the box. You're going to beat us with Samaj Morgan on the outside. Best of luck there. And we're going to play the field position game and go march down the field. So I'm interested to see how it shakes out. I know Caleb Johnson, I don't know his exact number, what he finished with, but I know it was drastically under his average per game. So I think when they load that box with the guys they have on the front, in the front seven, it's tough sledding for anybody.
We'll finish in a few minutes back with the Michigan game. Let's move ahead to further action. Ohio State and Oregon have played each other already, and we kind of saw how that was at Oregon. We've talked about it already on the show. Ohio State wins. They play them neutral field, Lucas Oil. Probably going to be more Ohio State fans than Oregon fans just because of travel considerations. It's a 2.5-hour drive from Columbus. It is a multi-hour flight from Eugene, Portland, wherever all the Oregon fans are at. What would be your early line that you would put on that game? Your line, not necessarily. I know that we've seen people put futures out there of, my prediction is going to be this, but you handicap it.
Yeah, I would have Ohio State minus 3.5, maybe up to 4.5, but conservatively 3.5. I think neutral site. We want to get our lick back. We've understood what you did, and obviously, I don't think anyone's sitting here saying Ohio State played their best game in Eugene. And on the flip side, I think Oregon had some flaws in that game, but that's the best game I've seen Dylan Gabriel play this entire year. And you can zoom out and look at all the other games they played. That, along with the big plays that we continuously gave up, the 2 crucial turnovers we had, I don't think anybody says Ohio State played their best game. And so on the flip side, I think Oregon, from an offensive perspective, was as good as I've seen this entire year. Another question I think is, how good is Oregon on the road? I mean, we saw, I'm not saying Camp Randall in Wisconsin is an easy place to go play, but that offense looked and I know it's every week is so much different, but that offense looked absolutely nothing compared to what we saw against Ohio State. And so that's kind of my lean, and I would take OSU minus the points. Again, though, from a handicapping perspective, is there conversation coming from both sides? Because knowing how Dan Lanning is, and he's always trying to mastermind and get creative, is he purposely trying to get the 5 spot? I don't know. And so as crazy as it sounds, that kind of goes into my thought from a handicapping perspective is, do these guys ultimately want the 5 seed and they find giving up a conference championship to have the route to go win the Natty? So I'd be curious your thoughts, but that's kind of where my head goes.
Well, I'll start by saying that Tez Johnson has been out of the lineup since he played November 2nd, has not played since. There were rumors of collarbone injury.
Yep.
They've tried to say, oh, that's not the case, and I'll be back, which again is very open-ended. Words mean things. So I'm not sure on there, but it's probably not the same team. Ohio State's down 2 offensive linemen. I mean, at least Josh Simmons started that game, got hurt, and then obviously they've lost Seth McLaughlin. The goal is to win natties, but Oregon could do something that none of these other teams that have gone into the Big Ten have been able to do, and that's win a conference championship in their first year. Yeah. Penn State in the 90s. I remember I was an undergrad at Ohio State at the time. Oh, we're going to come in and we're going to whoop that butt and we're going to win 8 straight conference titles. Well, that didn't happen. Nebraska certainly had its bluster. I mean, even though it was a program kind of on the decline at that point still. Didn't really get that out of Rutgers and Maryland because they were Rutgers and Maryland. Yeah. And then, Oregon comes in and, UCLA certainly is down. Washington is down, especially from what it was last year. USC, I don't know what to make of that team. I think there are a lot of people pulling for USC this week against Notre Dame, but that's another story. I think I'd have it at 5. I think I'd have it at 5 because I would almost give Ohio State the 2.5 to 3 point bump for being at home. And I think Ohio State is more battle tested as of this moment coming down the stretch. Penn State, Indiana, an emotional game against Michigan, I think is much more compelling than, as you mentioned, the game at Camp Randall. I was in Chicago. The Northwestern game was over. I was sitting at a restaurant bar watching the game. People were trying to change the channel, put on the UFC fight. I'm losing my mind. So it was very unimpressive. And Luke Fickell had some really questionable decisions in that game for Wisconsin.
Yeah. 100%. So what would your line be Ohio State at home in the shoe?
I would probably not that much different. I'm almost saying I might take it to 6.5 is not like a big deal because it's like, touchdown's a damn touchdown, 7 is 7 or whatever. But I would probably bump it up another point or something like that because again, I think Lucas Oil, if you've never had a chance to see a game there, can get really loud, but it is an NFL Coliseum type of stadium. The sound, it's a dome, but the sound kind of dissipates a little bit. I mean, I like the fact that it's, a sterile environment in terms of they're playing on a rug. They're playing on a good rug. They're not playing on Ohio State's turf that has created a lot of questions and issues. It's been slippery and everything else. I think that playing at Lucas Oil benefits a lot of Ohio State's speed. And Oregon is a really fast team. Let's not both of these teams would not be lost in the SEC. But I mean, with Jeremiah and Emeka and Carnell and Quinshon and Trevion, I mean, all these guys are going to be. There's not going to be any excuses for, well, I lost my footing, because you're playing on a dry surface in a dry building that that the air is set to 64 degrees or whatever, or the heat, I guess at this point will be set to 64 degrees, and nobody's going to be freezing to death.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And like you said, I think travel doesn't mean a ton at this time of the year. I think giving it's a neutral site neutral site with, in a dome, I don't think that means a ton, but the fan perspective and what that, differentiating factor is at 70-30 Ohio State, 75-25. I think that definitely plays a factor and gives you more of that home game feel, which, in these type of games, every bit of edge that you can get goes a long ways. And so we do what we do this week. That's kind of what I expect moving forward.
We kicked off the show by saying that this week, there are a lot of rivalry games, but there maybe are not a ton of big games. Outside of Ohio State, Michigan, what games are you most interested in? And I'm not necessarily saying towards supporting your Ohio State interests, but just, as somebody who dabbles a little on games.
Yeah, I think the Iron Bowl is always one that's you just never know. I mean, look at last year and what we got there. I think you never really know what that's going to look like. So I think that's one that always is pretty enticing and fun to watch. Obviously, living in East Tennessee, not that it's been a historic rivalry, but Vandy's been able to win more than they probably should have. Was Vandy, Tennessee, and especially this year with the implications this game means for Tennessee and truly their season, given what upsets and what Vandy's been able to do. I'm enticed to see what that environment looks like and if Pavier is able to pull another trick out of the hat and shock the world again. So I think those are kind of the two I'm tuned into, obviously this weekend. But, I think the big thing is every game I'm watching now is honestly in the best interest and best perspective for Ohio State. And so I'm a huge Georgia Tech fan this weekend. I mean, I'm really trying to configure what 11 teams aside from Ohio State gives us the best chance to go win the national championship.
Have you found that having this big ticket has changed maybe the way that you're approaching other games right now? I mean, it's one thing about, I have a rooting interest. I grew up watching XYZ team, but I need them to lose because the line is too juicy and I got to do that. Has your action shifted or diminished a little bit? Or, I mean, how do you approach things?
Yeah, I wouldn't say at this point it has, but there's been several instances, and I'll give you one. The Kentucky-Georgia game earlier in the year, I knew Georgia's schedule, and they had some tests they hadn't even got to at that point. And given what that game was like in the fourth quarter, the betting me would say you should absolutely bet Georgia right here. They're light years the better team. But I wanted Kentucky to win the game and go ahead and give Georgia a loss with what they had left on their remaining schedule. And I try not to do that per se, because that's not a smart strategy, because what I want to happen doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen, and I may as well try and make money while doing it. But it's definitely several games I've watched. I've rooted for a team solely for the purpose, not from a betting perspective, but wanting an upset to happen for the best interest of Ohio State.
Who out there nationally is the biggest threat to Ohio State in the playoffs? I mean, we can sit there and say, "Oh, South Carolina's the hottest team, and Florida's doing that." Well, they're not getting in the playoff. But I mean, who is the biggest threat to Ohio State?
I think it's Oregon, and I don't necessarily think that's a compelling argument any other way. I think given what Kirby Smart and Georgia and the talent they have are able to do, that always possesses a threat in itself, just given how talented that roster is, and can probably go in some areas head-to-head with Ohio State. But from a pure, this is what the offense looks like, this is what I've seen on tape, I think it's Oregon. And I hate, given the landscape of how it's going to shake out, I don't see a world where they make it to the national championship for round 3. I think they're going to, like we said, that 1 in the 5 seem to just essentially be locked to the Big Ten teams. And so you wonder if the committee understands that and says this team's already played twice. The only way they should meet each other the third time is the national championship. But unfortunately, I don't see it shaking out that way. So I think at the end of the day, it is Oregon. But I think my number 2 would probably be Georgia, just given the landscape of what Kirby Smart's been able to do and the roster that he has.
A sexy dark horse pick that fell apart was Ole Miss. Talked to a lot of people who felt that at plus 1,100 at the time, we're going to get a lot of value on that, and then Ole Miss just kind of, spray farted. You shocked by that?
A little bit. I will say what Napier, in my opinion, should be up for SEC Coach of the Year. I'm sure he probably will be, but given that schedule with the injuries he's had and what they've been able to do and some of the wins they've been able to have, him and Shane Beamer, in my opinion, have done 2 incredible jobs. But I think it comes back, and I went to battle for him, and I told some buddies I take it back. But Lane Kiffin just can't win the game he needs to win to get over the hurdle. And everyone wants to talk about Ohio State's $20 million roster. Well, Lane Kiffin went and spent $12 million, had a pretty cupcake schedule, and is not heading to the playoffs at all. So that's something for perspective. Is like, what has Ryan Day and Ohio State not done that you wanted to see? And so, if you really want to start pointing fingers at guys who went and spent a ton of money, go look at what Ole Miss did and what's came from their schedule of where they should have step walked 11-1 into the playoffs as a top 6 seed.
My final question, I do reserve the right for a follow-up here. I preface this. This is not betting advice. Don't necessarily go off this, and I will make a pick too. The game, Ohio State, Michigan. How do you see it going? And final score.
Pure and utter domination is all I'm going to leave it at. Final score, I'm going to go final score 45-6.
I have not written my. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I'm excited to hear yours.
Yeah, I've not put mine down on paper yet, or on a Word document. Nobody uses paper. I mean, I'm showing my age right there. But Ohio State is definitely the better team. There will be some dyed in the wool Michigan fans who will argue that, but reality is reality. Ohio State is the better team. My concern would be that Ohio State comes out and presses too hard. But we've already seen what Ohio State looks like in a lot of first quarters. And then they figure it out, and Jim Knowles makes the tweaks he needs to, and Chip Kelly makes the tweaks that he needs to, and hopefully Ohio State doesn't throw a little slant route for 2 yards when it needs 6 yards on a third down.
Yep.
I think Ohio State's defense is going to do a good job of shutting down Michigan's run game. I don't know if I'm willing to go to 80 yards or 75 or whatever I had there, but I'm going to say under 110. But
Okay.
crazy things do happen in this game,
Yeah.
and Ohio State seems to turn the ball over every so often in this series. So I'm not ready to say that Ohio State is going to like shut them out, which everybody would like lose their minds over. But I think Ohio State will have a very workmanlike, clean game. Outside of that, Michigan's place kicker is fantastic. The fact that he
Yeah.
was not up for the kicker award is crazy.
Yeah.
He is
Yeah.
15 of 16. His only miss was inside of 30. He missed a 26-yarder. He has 4 or 5 makes outside of 50 with a long of 56. I like Ohio State to win this one 35-9. I think 3 field goals for Michigan, drives that get into field goal range for them, but they can't crack the red zone.
Yeah, I like that. And then obviously that gives us the cover too. So back to my best bet, I would, depending on what book you're on, again, this is not financial advice. This is pure betting perspective. So bet responsibly. But over 31 team total, I would take minus 20.5. I would take Michigan team total under 10. You pick your juice. But I think all 3 of those come to fruition, and Buckeyes and Ron Day make an absolute statement this weekend.
And if all of that happens, it means we might be talking weekly coming up here soon, as we get closer and closer.
Every week it's do or die.
Do or die. I want to bring it up one more time. Let me take the banner down let me take the banner down that I have. I swear I know what I'm doing. Not driving drunk. And here's the bet for those of you who have joined us late. 3-legger, all coming down to Ohio State winning the national championship, turning 14-8 and change into 437, 417, and 70 cents. And we know that Uncle Sam is going to love to cut into that one. But what a wager, what foresight to have that in there. Scheffler has hit. The Tennessee Volunteers College World Series win has hit. And now the Buckeyes just stand a couple of wins away from making Calvin Smith one happy man with a big bet coming in like that. I guess one final question, and we've talked about this on previous shows. We've asked, but now that you're sitting here at this point, is there any chance that anybody would be able to buy this bet off of you?
I actually had a conversation with Zach about this because I think he had some interesting meetings. I think everyone has a number, right? But given what the value is versus what you could go bet it right now, it doesn't make sense for you to buy it, and I wouldn't sell it at the price of the true current valuation. I think is $167,000. If you truly were just to go put that number at the betting odds, that's what it would be at, and I wouldn't sell the ticket for that number. So as we continue to progress and that number goes up, I'm sure there's a number that makes sense that it was still a phenomenal bet, and I'll root the Buckeyes in to go win it all still and probably take that cash out and then bet part of it on the Buckeyes still to win it just because of my vested interest. But right now, it doesn't make sense for someone to buy it at the price that it's truly valued at, and I wouldn't sell it at that price. So right now, we're all in. We're riding the Bucks and excited for this next 7 to 8 week stretch that we're about to go on.
There you go. So stay tuned is what I just heard there. And, if we get into the late rounds of the playoffs and that number gets higher and higher, but, it's a good problem to have. We were talking about on a show yesterday about hand pays in Vegas, and I'm like, I've never had a hand pay. I don't play machines, but I mean, that would be, I would be over the moon. I wouldn't even know what to do. I would probably end up tipping the attendant way too much because I would be too damn excited about that. But I could not imagine. I won a $40 bet, and really I only won like 37 because of the juice and everything like that, and I was thrilled. I felt like I conquered Europe at that point.
Yeah. I haven't ever I went out to Vegas for the Super Bowl last year. Didn't get to obviously place a hand bet given my bank had some errors, but I think that would be a lot of fun. I can't imagine what that looks like because you sometimes get lost on just the number in the screen, but the in-person feel of collecting that would be pretty exciting. So who knows? Maybe that's to come, and I get out there and play something else before we get to January 20th.
Well, I think that if you win the bet, a Vegas trip will be well deserved by you. And I don't think the family would be that upset about the
They can
breadwinner
come
going
with.
out and having a little fun and blowing off a little steam after
Right. Yeah.
a season that has had its not many downs, but there have been some downs and there's certainly been
Yeah.
some ups. And
Right.
I think that Ohio State can cross a huge hurdle on Saturday if it is
Yep.
able to get past its hated rival to the north, and then we will get into the postseason. But I promise you, we've had tremendous response. We've had, we got over 250 people watching us right now as we've changed our distribution system. This is something I want to keep doing moving forward. We'll keep tweaking it and get this out to as many people. But Calvin, I want to thank you for joining us. I want to wish you and your family a happy Thanksgiving. And
Likewise,
of course, a big game coming up on Saturday. How are you going to watch the game? Are you going to isolate yourself in there? I mean, how are you going to have friends over? How are you watching the game?
I have my son. We went up, and I know we're wrapping up here. We went up to Cincinnati where my family lives, and my son is about to be 3 in December, and he only thought we were going to Ohio State. So everywhere we were going, he was like, "Are we going to Ohio State?" And so we got that part down, and we have the OSU chant down that he does every single day. So we're on the right path. He likes to watch the games with me, and I like that. Obviously, I have to watch some of the things I say and some of the frustration on some plays. But
they pick things up. They pick things up.
Oh yeah, they do. So I have to be strategic there. But yeah, probably have the kids, but their nap times and stuff aligned to where I'm going to have some me time to really just focus in and dive into it. I'm excited for it. It should be a good day to be a Buckeye. So looking forward to that.
Absolutely. So here's to a good weekend, and we will. I'll be in touch with you on text messages and DM. But I want to really thank you for joining us. As I want to thank everybody who's watched us or watches us on the replay. Thank you for watching us here on Behind the Bet. We will have some cut ups from here as well that we will distribute to social media. But if you like this, be sure to leave a comment, leave a thumbs up. Let us know that you really enjoyed the show. We want to do more things like this. We're going to try and find more big bets out there through in the coming weeks and months to be able to do these types of pieces, because not everybody, there's more than one way to skin a cat, and everybody approaches things differently. And I know I'm learning things. And hopefully I'm teaching people some things too. I mean, as long as it's Ohio State, because that's what I know the most about.
Right,
and beer.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Love it. Yeah.
But until next time, I want to thank everybody for watching us on Behind the Bet, powered by WagerWire. I'm Kevin Noon, joined by Calvin Smith, and we'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks, Kevin.